Hello, good morning. First of all, I'd like really to thank the organizers, and particularly Eduard Vallori, the Director General, for giving me the chance to moderate this amazing table with such distinguished speakers. To my left, Professor Michiel Scheffer, President of the EIC, European Innovation Council. Welcome.
Thank you.
Dr. Joe Burry. Wow. Dr. Joe Burry, Director Emeritus of the Flanders Institute of Biotechnology, the VIB, and in remote, Professor Maria Leptin, President of the European Research Council. I believe we all agree that Europe is going through an existential challenge at this moment, because its well-being and the economic growth depend on its ability to be competitive in a global context of accelerated change and volatility. I'll quote one of the most highly cited papers, which is the Draghi report, that emphasizes the need of Europe to adapt to these new economic realities by fostering investment, increasing productivity, and implementing coordinated industrial policies. And it also warns that without doing this, we risk falling behind global competitors such as US, that I'm sure we'll talk about today, and China. So there's been suggestion of actions to be taken, and in the plan is obviously a significant boost in the annual investment, 800 billion, which is around 500% of EU GDP, adopting research-based industrial models, devoting these resources to frontier research, and adopting simpler and more flexible regulations. In this framework, I would like to discuss today, in this roundtable, what are the institutions behind our colleagues here doing to address these challenges. We have here, as I mentioned, two of the main institutions, European Research Council, European Innovation Council. We've seen ERC that has been instrumental in funding groundbreaking research and also moving downstream towards funding translational research with the proof of concept and the synergy grants. EIC as well is playing a crucial role in seeding syndicates to boost and to fund the groundbreaking research of early startups in Europe. But still, and we know there's a huge innovation gap in Europe. So, which are, according to you two, and I'll give the floor to Maria first, and then to Michiel, which are, according to you, the priority areas that we should address? Are we putting the focus there? Are we investing enough? And are we being fast enough? So, Maria, the floor is yours.
Thank you. So it's great to be here. Of course, it would be much nicer to be there with you. Then I could see the new building of the La Caixa going up, and I could be there with the many friends I have in Barcelona, among whom I hope I can count Andreu and Nuria. So good to be there, and I greet all the ERC grantees in the audience and everyone else. So we're here to discuss how Europe can compete in an era of rapid technological and economic change. This has often been framed as the European paradox, which is the idea that Europe produces world-class research, but then struggles to commercialize it. I don't think this framing is entirely convincing. The Draghi report, as you just quoted, was clear. Europe's core problem isn't a failure to translate research into innovation. It's rather that we have a fragmented and over-regulated single market that makes it difficult for companies to scale up. So if I answered your question by focusing on fixing one missing link in an innovation pipeline between research and innovation, we would neglect the wider problem of what happens at the end of that pipeline. And that is that European entrepreneurs operate in a fragmented market that does not allow rapid growth. Of course, this does not mean that we can neglect research excellence and disruptive innovation. or focus only on adoption or application. With the speed at which the knowledge frontier is moving today, we simply can't afford to be left behind. The strength of the Draghi report was that it took a holistic view, an overall view. The scientific community, the startup community, and the world of finance and regulation are not always well connected and naturally tend to see things from their own point of view. But if we want Europe to be competitive, we need to address research excellence and disruptive innovation, and also market conditions for scaling breakthrough ideas. And by the way, that also means for all member states in Europe to pull together and not be individualistic, but be one Europe. So all of these are necessary for Europe to thrive. We can't simply prioritize just one or two of these steps, as none of their own is sufficient. So I think that's where I'll stop for the moment. I guess we'll have a discussion and we can go over the individual points later.
Thank you very much. I think we would all agree with what has just been said. So regarding EIC, you're funding startups that are facing these challenges that have been highlighted, fragmented market, different reimbursement models. So it is complicated for startups to grow. And as an investor in startups, I feel it and live it every day, right? And EIC is doing an instrumental role. So what is, according to you, where do you want to put your efforts in the coming decade to really bridge these problems of fragmentation and innovation gap?
Well, there are a number of problems aligned. I'm sorry, my voice has to come back. There are a number of aligned problems. But just to start, I don't like the problem frame.
Okay. Opportunity
just
frame.
As an example,
Let's go for the opportunity frame.
I came yesterday by train from Madrid to Barcelona in 2.5 hours. Spain has 4,000 kilometers of high-speed rail links.
That we have.
The US 175 kilometers. Huh?
We can discuss about that, but that's another issue.
But let's be clear as well. So every time we take the AI and ICT frame, yes, we are behind the US. But our public transport is superior, our healthcare system is superior, life expectation is still growing in Europe, and America is going down. America is mainly growing in kilos. Mm-hmm. So let's not underestimate ourselves, and we do that too much. But yes, we have a number of issues, and one of them is still a fragmentation of innovation systems. What I always look at when I see people coming by is, do I see Erasmus? Do I see that people from Greece, I saw some, I think, are also working in Spain, and vice versa. So we also we have to generate a generation of people who make love and do research across countries. And Erasmus is a very important basis, and I see Erasmus also in our EIC portfolio. A lot of our startups we fund, a lot of projects have done that because they moved to universities in other countries and start up a company. But the fragmentation is really one major issue, and one of the things we do as EIC, but EIC does it as well, is create an ecosystem. By having people with the same label, they recognize each other. Oh, that's something I can relate to. So a lot of my work is to exchange telephone numbers and email addresses. That's one thing. The second thing is, and that's really a problem, we have been promising for 25 years that we should spend 3% of the GDP on science and research.
Yeah.
25 years we've been doing that. And politicians, I'm sorry, there's one here, also politicians said that, but they didn't do it. And so every time we sacrifice research to other objectives in public policy. And that's something we can no longer afford. Draghi was yesterday in the European Parliament and he was complaining that some don't want the capital union, other ones want. Some want to improve the single market, other ones don't want. More money at European levels, some don't want that. More money at national level, my government is doing a sacrifice, cutting 1 billion euros of funding of Dutch research. The regions have to do more. But basically what Draghi says, we have to do all of them, not
either or.
One. And politically, we have not yet a majority of creating, okay, we have to do a number of things to put Europe first again.
Wow, that sentence.
And then the final one, that's also a big challenge, is we don't spend our savings well. And so we often say, yes, starters go to the US. Indeed, 3,000 starters go to the US from Europe a year. That's far too much. But we spend 600 billion of our savings in the US. That's the equivalent of 60,000 startups a year. That's the big story. That basically we are not able to spend our own savings, and we have far more savings than the Americans. We are not able to spend those savings in Europe, and that requires a number of financial reforms.
Yeah, fully agree.
I have more, but...
No, okay, I'm sure. Yeah. You've mentioned the word ecosystem, and actually BIST is what it's trying to do, right? Through putting together the critical mass of excellent transdisciplinary research under one umbrella for to have different focus. The VIB is an excellent example of an ecosystem of excellent research, access to funding, really vibrant environment in the vicinity. So I'd like you to share with us the secret sauce, and how do you make it? How do you go about creating it? And if there's any shortcuts for us to get there?
Yeah, well, there is no real secret sauce. And we didn't start VIB with the ambition, oh, we are going to create an ecosystem with 300 companies. That doesn't work. So we did it step by step. And so the ambition, so we had this visionary politician that wanted to spend money on this. We started with about 25 million euros a year, which is a lot of money, structural funding of basic research. And so we gathered, we identified the most promising PIs within the existing universities in Flanders. And then, of course, over the years, blended that with international recruitments of PIs. And now it's very international. We have over 90 nationalities within the institution. But we started from the bottom, identifying the best research you can do at the front line of science. So the first thing we did was cut all applied research going on. It was mediocre, it was going nowhere. If you want to get IP, you have to be new, you have to be inventive, you have to be creative, it has to be applicable, but you have to come with something new at the front line of science. That's where innovation starts. So that's where we started. And so we've developed that. We have now 90 PIs, 90. That's a nice critical mass, about 2,000 people. And I dare to say that every one of them belongs to the top 10% in the world in their field. The competition is not local, the competition is not Europe, the competition is the world. And so we have installed a system of quality assurance and quality control that we remain at that level. So that's the first part. So you start with innovative science. And then, of course, the second part is that you take the responsibility to capture the value that is created by discovery research, and you translate it into value for society. And the first step in doing that is filing patent applications. I can tell you, our scientists didn't like it. They thought it was unethical that money spent from civilians provided us by politicians, that we would turn that into a for-profit business. They didn't like it at all. So it was a cultural change to, convince them to do that. Now, after almost 30 years, it's part of their DNA. I would say even their daily natural attitude to reflect if there is a new discovery, that you can turn it into an invention, protect that invention with IP, and then do something with it. Go proactively to the existing company world and try to persuade them to invest in that discovery and bring it to application, to market, to society, basically. And so we have been kind of lucky, in our path. All of a sudden, 2007, the ERC was founded. And then our PIs could apply to the ERC. We already had a very, I would say, competent ecosystem in Flanders to support research. And yes, we are at 3% in Flanders of the BNP invested in research. So this is one thing. So ERC, about 40% of our faculty has a running ERC as we speak. So this is really what needs to be done. And then the later step was then all of a sudden EIC was born. I was part of the pilot board of the EIC, and I could help to shape it. Yet another blessing for Europe. I think Europe has finally found, through the European Commission, their way to stimulate science discovery into innovation. And there are things to be improved, but I think this is a major step forward for Europe. And so these environment, obviously by surrounding our scientists with professional tech transfer people, we could convince our scientists to go the path, the extra mile of innovation. It takes time, it takes an investment of the scientist, but the scientist doesn't know how to write a patent application, how to develop business from science. They have no clue. Let's run a company. And so we surround our scientists with experts, with professionals. I call them bilingual. They talk the language of the scientist, but they also talk the language of the business, be it IP, be it business development, be it venture creation. And so that combination, creates a platform. And now I can say, indeed, we started 36 companies from our basic research. We attracted another 25 to the growing ecosystem in Flanders, which is now about 120 R&D intensive companies in biotech, plus another 120 or so service companies that serve that ecosystem. Is that a secret sauce? I don't know. It goes step by step.
No, it makes sense, and there are a lot of parallelisms with what's behind BIST, which is 7 of the research centers, but also some of the initiatives here in Catalonia during the last 20 years, right? Betting for schemes like ICREA to recruit the right scientists that can then get the projects, ERCs, etc. Thank God these tools are out there, right? But regional policies to really boost ecosystem spaces such as science parks where you can put together the different ingredients. One of the missing links, though, and for me and to my opinion, and you mentioned that, is to achieve excellent tech transfer offices and to recruit the right people that are bilingual, and that is very difficult to do. And I don't know, I think if you want to mention anything related to that, because it's certainly very difficult to achieve that link is there with the right quality and to attract the right type of people.
Yeah, but let's be realistic as well. I mean, I'm also a character like that. I did a PhD, but I never really worked in science. So a lot of people having a PhD are more interested in the interaction, in developing policies, in doing tech transfer. So there are enough skilled people who can do that, as you say, the translation work, and love that. And so it's interesting to try to combine 2 or 3 worlds all together, and it hasn't been all my life, but I'm certainly not the only one. What is important, and this is a good example, is you need to create a critical mass. Because of things like patent writing or applying for grants or the Excel tables for budgeting and the administration afterwards is better pooled than to have it segmented. So to pool in an institute or at a regional level is a very valuable thing to do. And what we see is that regions or places that pool very well their skills do much better. And just to give a compliment, we have 2 major instruments, Pathfinder and Accelerator. Pathfinder is really frontier research where the researchers think but not know yet if there's an application possible. Catalonia is shared 2nd place in the Pathfinder. Paris is number 1. And Rome is also number 2. And if we look at the Accelerator, which is really promoting the startup out of, let's say, ideally out of research centers, but it's not the only track. There, Barcelona is the big one, but Catalonia scores number 4. So the ecosystem is here strong. If you are in those places, you do well. I was also in Madrid. Yeah, that's a bit different. It's slightly lower, but also top 10. So Spain has 2 cities in the top 10 of Europe in terms of, let's say, our applicants. So building those ecosystems are important. And what is also important, it's in Catalonia a strength, there is still industry. So it is possible to create connections with industry that either supply stuff or subcontract production or become partners or take over technology. So that's also a possibility. But what I don't want to monopolize is that not all technology should lead to a capitalistic enterprise. And there's also other solutions. For example, we will have, at the end of the year, a call for foundation models in diagnosis of cancers. Well, that does not necessarily lead to a company. That can also be a project in which university hospitals or hospitals share their knowledge, form a cooperative, and develop it. So I would also like that we also, as an accelerator, we don't only fund companies that later are taken over by US multinationals, but that we also fund companies with a more cooperative character.
Okay, I'll go back to this point later.
Yeah.
But,
Caixa is also a corporate bank, I think.
you mentioned the word before, make Europe great again, so that, I mean, we started with Draghi, which is very, highly cited, but unfortunately Trump is in all the discussions. And I would like to know, from the ERC perspective, this new volatility times that we're living, and the speech of like endorsing more funding for defense, is that going to like move the focus away from research? How is that going to affect the coming years? How do you see it coming? This different environment we're living in.
Well, that's a bit of double guessing. And it's certainly above my pay grade. I think we do have to invest in defense, and we do. There is a fund in Europe, the DEFIS, DEFIS. We do invest in defense, and so we should. And maybe it is true that we've been too lax on that and too trusting the peace that we've seen over the past. It's almost 70 years now in Europe. So, but how is that going to affect the rest of us? What we're seeing in the wars is that new technologies are being adopted like there's no tomorrow. The old technologies are almost not helping anymore. And so if we wanted to argue that, of course, we'd rather argue for ways of stopping wars. But if we want to argue for defense industry, that too needs fundamental research. And that too needs a pipeline like the one that's been described by Michiel and Joe. But we can never, ever cut off the fundamental research. And so that needs to be done. We could, of course, say, well, okay, but, we can say this for defense and we can say this for innovation. We can just use fundamental research. It's already been done. Now let's innovate. But that's, of course, not true. We need to have the people who do the fundamental research in order to know how to use it to innovate. We need to train the young people who, like Michiel says, don't want to go into the scientific career, but have learned science and can then apply it. But we also have to, and we keep hearing, we need to maintain our lead or what. We know, are we honestly still leading? I don't think we are. So we can't say we're leading in research and it's only the innovation that's not functioning. If we look at the metrics, we are no longer leading in research. And not only do we not invest as much as the US and China, we also don't publish as well. The big discoveries are not mostly coming from us. So the other, and I want to come back to what both Michiel and Joe said. If we compare ourselves, of course, the talent here is as great as anywhere in the world. And of course, we have great institutions. And of course, the ERC has helped to support those exceptional people. But what both Joe and Michiel were pointing out is local concentrations. And of course, Catalonia, especially Barcelona, is one, and VRB is one. There are a few others. There's Cambridge, for example, and there's a few others. And if we look across to the US, where industry settles and where people who take any of this settle to work with it for other purposes is around the centers. So enabling the big centers is really important. The elite universities, much as we might hate that term, but all of these clusters, they do bring conditions that individual sites can't have. Like the tech experts and the patent experts that Joe mentioned. You can't have one for every who is excellent, and they're not that easy to find. It is not true that they abound out there. Most universities don't have great people who can do this. So this is something that is much harder in Europe, where we are not one Europe, but many member states, or even non-EU states who are at least as important, UK and Switzerland, for example, then having one big country where, where anybody can operate across the entire country. So this is, again, brings me back to what I said earlier. It's the European countries that have to pull together to enable this and to act together and to break down borders more than we've seen. And I know there are people in Spain, and Andreu is one of those as well, who's been saying this forever. We need a European research area that works.
Well, I think we would all agree with this. The thing is, how do we go about it, right? With the tools we have in hand, or do we need new tools? Is something like, for instance, all the new schemes for AI that have been announced only last week, going to help with that?
Yeah, well, of course it helps. Of course it helps. But, as always, the scientists on the ground are actually ahead of the politicians. So in AI, there are already existing networks. The most eminent is probably ELIS, which is a network of the leading AI researchers. They've already set up training programs, exchange programs, shared infrastructure, doctoral programs. So they're already there. We've got a network in Europe. So, we as scientists tend to do that anyway. It's our country leaders who have to pull together. Yeah. Unfortunately, there is very little the people here on the stage or me on the screen can do about that, except go to our member states, go to our parliamentarians, but go to our governments and say, look, for once, realize what has to come first, and that is sticking together, acting together, not fight, stand up to the rest of the world as a unit, not fight each other.
Yeah, we do have this challenge, and from the perspective of the startups, which is a space I realize that even though we have much in the health space, for instance, I'm in life sciences, much better health systems, tons of data in Europe, different health systems, which is a problem, but on the other hand, you can really do adoption in specific places. The way to succeed is they always move to the US. So it's depending on which spaces US is the market. For instance, you talking digital health, for instance, or companies that need to scale up, right, in a single market. So do we have the right tools in place to create EU champions, or what? And I'm looking at you from the EIC. Is there the right continuum beyond the funding that, for instance, EIC can provide to a startup in the beginning, or to really help these companies then thrive as EU champions with the fragmented market we have and the different regulations?
Well, to start with, I was just nodding on they all go to America. We did a research with the Technical University of München. On average, 6% of startups move to the US. So let's say 94% stays in Europe.
Might be sector dependent, yeah.
So there is a difference between countries, because France and Germany are below 3%. Poland and Portugal are far above 10%. So there are differences in the quality of an innovation system. So in regions with a better innovation system, people stay. On the other hand, there's nothing wrong, my wife did it, to go to the US to do a PhD and come back.
Yeah, I did it too. Most of the audience probably has done
so
it.
there's nothing wrong. I went to the UK to start my PhD. I came back as well. So mobility of research is a good thing. But indeed, we have to improve the environment. And there are two things to say about that. I think both the ERC and EIC does a very big job, but the success rates we have are tremendously low. So we could fund easily excellent projects if we had doubled the funding. It's only, so even with 3 times the funding, we still only fund excellent projects. So the funds are too little. That's one thing. And the second thing is and that's the big barrier compared to Europe, for Europe or to the US, to get to some dozens of millions, it's okay, that is feasible in Europe. The 100 millions are not available. So we lack, let's say, the use of our savings, 9.5 trillion euros. We don't use them well to channel them to, let's say, bigger entities or bigger challenges. There's one thing on the defense point I would like to add. I'm from the school of the demand-led innovation. So basically, the best innovation is that solves problem. And there I see defense a bit as a distraction because we have major urgent issues in Europe. We don't have energy, we don't have materials, we are importing proteins, and we have to improve the productivity of health to keep it accessible. And to use defense as a side way, yeah, it's not sure that the productivity of health will increase if we do more defense spending. Or are we going to increase the level of bio-based energies and bio-based materials if we use defense spending? I'm not sure of that. In the short term, defense spending will mean more steel, more petrol, and more meat. So the most efficient way of addressing civil issues is to invest in civil research and not to do it via the army. So I'm not entirely convinced that it will do. We have to do with it. So not to use defense spending for doing more research, but it's really a second best option.
And from the VIB, the challenge to really thrive and scale up during the next years with your model, or are there new ingredients, or is there anything that it's at stake at this point from the funding?
Well, several things, as Michiel said, trying to improve the environment. First of all, I would say beyond VIB, but at the scale of Europe, incentivize the scientists and the institutions and universities where they work to engage in innovation and to take tech transfer more seriously. Yeah. I think there is a lot of untapped potential that could find its way. Yeah. Okay. Certainly. This having said, of course, once you have this idea, this innovation, this new discovery that you can really take along, that's on sich not enough. You need to build a portfolio before you can even start up a company. So to come back to a point, about 90% of our valorization is going to existing companies just in a license. Most of the things that our scientists produce find value within existing ecosystem. Only like 10% or even less go to a new startup.
That makes sense.
With the new startups, there is always a challenge to find money. But never, almost never, we didn't find money to start the company. I think the following phase after Series B, Series C, it becomes more difficult in Europe to scale up to the next level, and which is one of the, I would say, ambitions of the EIC to kind of prune that. And then, finally, coming back to a remark made by Leptin in the beginning, this over-regulated market. Yeah. Getting your products to the market in Europe is a pain. It's a nightmare. And so even if you get good things, so for instance, medtech, we all know there is a new regulation on medtech since 5 years, and it was necessary. Everybody knows the stories, but Europe made such a monster of regulation that it's almost impossible for people to bring their technologies to market. And so we advise our companies in medtech to first go to US to get approval of their product there. Please stay in Europe with your company. And once you have approval there, then try to get approval in Europe. Because in the meantime, you make money. Isn't that a shame?
It is.
If we want to pull together our countries, yes, of course, every politician wants to talk about AI, but please give us a better framework of already existing stuff.
I think we should invite politicians next time instead of scientists, because we all agree, right? Yeah. We need to, as Maria said, it's above the payroll of all of us, right?
There's a whole range of examples. So one example is this one. But the Novel Foods Directive is anything but promoting novel foods. It's protecting the interests of the big farmers. And so there's also a political debate behind this regulation to keep, let's say, to protect certain incumbents and get newcomers. And startups are extremely important, and academics as well, to challenge the existing order, because only by doing that we change it. Yeah. And so I'm also saying, in view of the news of yesterday in the US, academic freedom is essential.
Indeed. We have 1 minute left. I would like each of you to give a fast, quick advice to BIST from your perspective. What would be your advice for the coming years to BIST? Michiel, you're on my left.
I would say mainly learn by listening to each other. So I'm going to listen the rest of the day.
Joe?
As I just said, a call to all scientists and all their institutions to take innovation serious.
And finally, Maria?
Maintain scientific ambition. don't dilute the focus on excellence.
Okay, so there you go, the final take-home messages. Thank you very much to the audience, and I think we can make an applause.